So good morning, everyone. We're going to get started with this this next session here. So today, for this session, we have a couple of assistant professors and associate professors from the School of Environment. Today we have Sean Geobey, who's an assistant professor, and Jennifer Lynes, an associate professor, both from the School of Environment. Sean and Jennifer will outline two similar but very distinct approaches offered to second and third year students by the School of Environment, Enterprise and Development. These examples will demonstrate how problem-based learning with industry partners can be successfully coupled with in-class pedagogical support. So if we're ready to go, please join me in welcoming Sean and Jennifer.
Thank you. So just make sure, yes, that works.
There we go.
I'm Professor Geobey. Jen will be coming up after my little bit, and then we'll both be doing some Q&A together. So we're going to be talking about two distinct courses here. And so I'll start with the first one here, which is InDev 308. That's Introduction to Social Entrepreneurship in our International Development Program. And just to give you an overview of where we're going to go here, I'm going to talk a bit about what that course is, how we actually integrate community members, industry partners into it, and then finally just a bit of some high-level outcomes and what we've seen over the past few years running this course in this way. So, first, what is this? InDev 308 is, again, in our International Development Program, Introduction to Social Entrepreneurship. For some context about what this looks like in the classroom, the lowest number of students I've had has been, I think it was 38, 39. Highest number of students I've had is about 70. And that's really the range we're usually doing in that class, is somewhere in kind of the 50-ish students, plus or minus. But 2/3 of my students are international development students. So this is a core course for our international development program. And importantly here is that we're right now offering this course in the winter term, and it's usually in the fall term that they start an 8-month international placement. So this is a non-co-op program, and really the core of the experiential learning element of that program is this 8-month placement. So they have our course, then they have a summer course in class, and then they go on the placement. Also, a very popular elective amongst our environment and business undergraduate students. So depending on when they take it, I sometimes have a mix of third, fourth year students, the occasional second year student in this class as well. Some of whom are actually taking my course at the same time as they're taking Jen's course, which we'll be talking about later. Plus, we also have just sort of a smattering of oddballs from around campus because it's an interesting elective and that's what happens. We hold this class once a week, 3-hour block for 12 weeks. So just some idea of just a bit of the standard formatting that we're using for this class. Here's a slide I show them in the first day of class, our first lecture. It's actually, after the title of the course, this is the first slide I put up. Because I'm going in with the expectation that this is the first time that any of the students have had a course that looks quite like this. And philosophically, the three key pieces that we work at are: one, experiential learning is critical. Second, we have a highly constructivist approach to the educational environment here. And the third piece is that there's a real emphasis on peer-based learning. What does this mean in practice? Well, the focus on the experiential side is problem-based learning. We deal with a very complex, wicked problem every year. It's messy, it's hard. Most of what the students actually spend their time doing in the term is actually figuring out what the problem is. This is an entrepreneurship class, so ultimately we're pivoting towards trying to come up with solutions. But really the focus pedagogically here is thinking through problem solving, thinking through problem definition. A second piece is that we heavily rely on colleague-to-colleague feedback. And in that, the assignments are built in with peer review as a critical part of the process early on. But then that's sort of leading into a lot of group work, team-based work in trying to figure out these problems. And finally, the public by default nature. And this is where the community interaction really comes into play, because the work that the students are doing, the default in this course is that it will be presented to partners in the community, to industry, to nonprofits, to government people. We present right up front the idea and try to embed it that your work isn't just going in the recycling bin once it's done. Your work is something that can have a direct impact on your world, on your community, and we really put that front and center. Now, this is not a pedagogical model. This is a group decision-making model that I find is quite useful in talking about and thinking through complex multi-stakeholder engagement processes around really difficult, challenging issues. And so this is from Kainer and the group around him. And really the idea behind this star-shaped model is that when you're really trying to work through and think through a complex problem with a group of people, there's going to start with a period of time where you're working through mapping out what that system looks like, what different options are, who the actors are, what the issues are. If you start, and that's going to lead to a lot of divergence in perspectives, opinions, value sets, the way people are looking at this. If you cut that off too early and go into a relatively simple solution early on, you're not exploring the depth of the problem space, and all you're going to do is end up reinforcing the status quo that you started with. So we go through this series of steps where we increasingly have divergent views and opinions. Then we have this spot in the middle, which Kainer calls the groan zone, which if you've been in a meeting, you have felt that, which is that part where everything lags, everything feels kind of stuck, everyone's a bit ticked at all the other folks in the room around them. And that's partly a sign of everyone reframing and rethinking where they are before starting to converge on a new set of solutions, a new set of possibilities. Why this decision-making mode in the classroom? Why bringing up at an experiential learning conference? Well, because we're going through a process over the course of the 12 weeks where we are really mirroring what that expansion and contraction process looks like. So this is what we call a social innovation lab model. It's a framework that we developed at the Waterloo Institute for Social Innovation and Resilience. We've been working with a model like this for about half a dozen years now. And until INDEV 308, the main application for this was actually working with industry partners from the public, private, and nonprofit sectors to solve or to work through complex issues like how we redesign the tender fruit system in Ontario, how we deal with issues of youth unemployment in the United States. But one of the things that we noticed throughout this process is it ended up being a really interesting learning opportunity for those people involved who were, industry leaders, people with PhDs, folks who are mid and late career professionals. So we thought, well, let's see what it looks like if we try this in a classroom with undergraduate students. And so there are three phases that we go through when we use this model. The first, which maps onto that divergence piece, is really about system mapping, but figuring out what a complex environment, complex system looks like. Second is design, where we're actually negotiating and thinking through what sets of possible solutions could look like, and where are the key parts of the system where if we make change, we're likely to see some transformative impact. And finally, moving towards prototyping, so developing viable models at the smallest possible scale to figure out whether our maps of the system and the approach that we want to take to transforming the system actually makes sense. A plan is only as good as how it works when it interacts with the real environment. In the classroom, here's how we map that out onto our 12 weeks. So week 1 is really about introduction, framing the entirety of the course, telling the students what the problem they'll be working on is. So when we're doing this process, every student in my class of about 50 are all working on the same problem. But it's a big, messy one with many different elements. So first class is introducing that. The last class, week 12, is where we do a reflection, a debrief of what we had done over the previous 11 weeks. And also I've been working with the class to really set up what they think next year's class should be working on. The best proxy I have for the interests of next year's class is this year's class. So I engage them in a co-design process as well. But we also have 3 places where we bring in the community. So the first step is, next year we'll be doing it in week 2. In the past I've done it in week 3, but I want to move it up a little more. Is we bring in about a dozen community members, public, private, nonprofit, academic sectors who all have experience working in a complex problem domain, in the same complex problem domain, and we do World Cafe-style breakout. So basically each community member sits at a different table. Students will organize in 4 or 5, each kind of with a community member for about 20 minutes to interview them. Then I'll ring a bell, 20 minutes, they have to go to a new table. We do that for 3 hours with a little coffee break in the middle. Whole idea for them, ask questions, take notes. Second time, week 7. So prior to week 7, the students have now been formed into teams to work around particular solutions, and they will have put together at a high level a sense of what their intervention should look like. And so we do the World Cafe style again, but basically this time instead of it being the students who move around the community members, it's the community members who move around the students. And the students have those 20-minute slots to pitch what they're thinking about their idea looks like, and spend 3 hours having community members with experience, different perspectives on the system, as well as some of their fellow students, basically kick that idea. Just poke holes in it, make suggestions, offer additional insights and perspectives, so that finally when we get to week 11 and the students do a final pitch, which we've been doing so far is a very traditional kind of pitch style presentation, they will have already gone through these 2 rounds of experiencing working with the community members in a relatively safe classroom environment. So, who are these community members who we end up working with? Well, every year we've been working on this, we have a different problem. First year we looked at the changing nature of youth and work. Second year we looked at urban intensification in Waterloo Region. Past year, we looked at sustainable food systems in Waterloo Region. Next year, we will be doing mental health and wellness in Waterloo Region. And so we will find industry partners who have some domain-specific expertise to come into the room. So Steckel Farms came in to do some of the local food systems work. Unifor person came in on some of our youth and work. Myovision was in the room when we were doing work on urban intensification. We also have some domain-specific researchers, so faculty or graduate students who will come in from various departments. Environment, AHS, and engineering have been our kind of biggest contributors so far, but because it really is problem dependent, who is in depends on what we're doing. And then finally, we've just had some people who came in early on who keep repeating. Often it's because they have a mandate that's relatively broad. So Sustainable Waterloo Region is there for anything that's local and sustainability oriented. The Kindred Credit Union, locally based credit union, makes sense to have them in the room for both their community involvement and their understanding of the financing that goes behind startup enterprises and interventions. St. Paul's Greenhouse for supporting social entrepreneurship, region of Waterloo, because we've been trying to keep our issues fairly locally targeted. So every year we're going to get a blend of those 3 different categories of industry partners. And in the end, what do we have? Well, in addition to the presentations, what I also do is take the best individual assignments from the course as well as the best pitches for interventions and create a class portfolio every year as well. So this ends up getting put together shortly after the term finishes. And I share it with all of the industry partners as well as the class who had just gone through it to get a sense of, from a really broad level, all the work that has been done working on this problem domain. What it also does is it serves as a really nice guidepost for the following year's class, because I make the previous year's class portfolios required reading for the first week or 2 of the course. We have some unusual assignments that we do in the class, so it also gives them nice models and guidelines to do things that, might be very unusual. We don't do standard essays or midterms or final exams in this class. And what have we seen for outcomes? Well, I've done 3 offerings of this course so far, and we've obviously iterated it each time, as one does. But there's been some interesting things that have happened already. We have certainly seen students use individual aspects of this course in their placements overseas, particularly the in-depth students. I will often receive emails while they're out on placement saying, hey, we need to put together a pitch deck. Can you send me the template that we used in class for that to give us guidelines or things like that? We've also seen students every year, basically the following term. I've had 1 or 2 students who've wanted to take the project that they've worked on and do either directed study or a thesis course with it. So we do see that. We have also seen interventions get pitched at velocity that were developed in this course. I don't know if we've seen any go directly to Greenhouse from there either, but I imagine that will happen. We've also seen students pivot from the interventions that they had, but have sort of found a passion for the problem we've worked on. There's one student this past winter who got really involved in food systems in the way that she had never been in the past, and is now sort of working on a side startup that she's planning on launching basically this term or next term. Finally, the community members have gotten quite a bit out of this too. We have had community members give job interviews to students they've met through this course. One of my TAs this term actually got hired by one of our community members for a part-time position. And we've also seen community members take some of the ideas that students have pitched when the students didn't want to carry them forward to actually try them out as well. So I mentioned Steckel Farms. One of the pitches we had this winter was to do a traveling kind of farmer's market bus. The students who pitched it were like, this is a pretty interesting idea, but we don't really want to follow it. And Joel Knight from Steckel Farms said, yeah, we'll do it. We have a couple $1,000 in a dirty, beat-up bus hanging around. Let's give it a shot, see what happens. So it's been really interesting, not just from the student side, what the experiences they've been getting out of it, but this capacity for innovation that's coming from our students actually has been adding value to the community members as well. So that is it for me, at least until we have some discussion afterwards. Jen, your turn.
Sean, I was looking at your shoes. Those look like comfortable shoes. Comfortable on a pair of shoes like that. Okay, so part 2. We sort of frame this as Sean is looking at the multiple stakeholders approach, and mine is a single stakeholder. So I'm going to talk about our approach in NBUS 211, which is marketing principles for sustainability professionals. And I think Sean mentioned he's from Wiser. I'm from Wise. Is anybody out there from Wisest? Somebody has to create the Wisest. It's like when I do short track speed skating with this adult group, and we have 3 groups. We have fast, faster, and fastest, so we all feel fast. So, anyway, okay, moving on here. These up. Okay, so just a little bit about this course. It's a second-year course. It's been running for a few years, but this past year is the first time that I taught it. It had been taught by somebody else previously, although I've taught many other marketing courses. It's a theme elective for environment and business students. So right now we have probably like 90% of them are environment and business, but we did have some students from planning, environment and resource studies, so forth. Try to limit it to 50 students because the model that I'm working with is difficult to do with more than that. So I have to think of how I might do this if I was to scale up to have a higher enrollment. And so we do 2 times 1.5 hours. I sort of break it into shorter stints, and we meet twice a week. Okay, so I wanted to give you an idea of how what I'm going to talk to you about in this session fits in with what I'm doing in the class overall. I'm really trying to encourage creativity in this class. It's something that the environment and business students don't get a lot of. They're scared of. You can't Google it. You can't say, okay, I need to do this creatively. What am I going to do? So we do a lot of doodling in class. I encourage them to doodle. I give them blank paper at the beginning of the term. If anybody is not convinced about doodling, then you need to watch Sunny Brown's TED talk. It's 5 minutes long about why students should doodle, or anyone should doodle. So I try to get them thinking. And another trick, I'll give you a little secret here. I get them to, we take attendance each class, and I give them a little piece of paper, and they have to draw something on it and put their name on it. So it's not just their name, it's drawing whatever the theme is. So if the theme is fruit, then they can draw a fruit. And I collect these, and they don't get any marks for attendance, but this just giving them the little card that they have to fill it at the beginning, they come, and then if they miss the attendance, they say, I missed the attendance, can I have the little card so I can do my picture? I'm like, sure, but I don't ever do anything with them. It's this routine they get into at the beginning of class, and they feel like they need to be there for some reason. So that's my little trick. So I try to get the creativity flowing. So all of our assignments this year, they basically had a wide open blank slate. They could do whatever they wanted. There was a lot of videos, blogs, things like that. So we did greenwashing awards, where it was kind of like the Oscars, where they had to come up. They each had a theme like energy or transportation, and they had to come up with 5 nominees for the best greenwashing campaigns out there and present them, and then present the award. And they had to do a little video on that. So everything's worth 25%. That was worth 25%. They have a participation in e-portfolio, also worth 25%, so they reflect on their own participation in the course, and then they dive into something that they're particularly interested in, and do a blog on it and so forth. We have the marketing strategy, which I'm going to talk a little bit more in a minute, and then the anything assignment, which they can do whatever they want. Any medium, any topic, as long as it's related to marketing and sustainability and brings in elements of the course. So I had one student who did videos across the board, and he's one of the great examples of how this type of experiential learning can really bring the ones that aren't, the essay writers and the report writers and so forth. He's the type of student that's, might occasionally come to class, mainly just, was there for midterms, finals, whatever. He needed to be there. He came to every single class, and he was super excited about everything. He did all these videos. They were great. He won award for best video in the greenwashing. So it was really a great way to engage those students that think a little bit out of the box and aren't maybe that skilled necessarily at writing, which is definitely a part of university, but it doesn't have to be all of it. So I'm going to focus on the marketing strategy assignment, which we did with a local organization called Avocado. It's a co-op, Avocado Co-op. Their slogan is bringing sustainability home. So they deliver, you can order online and they'll deliver sustainable products to your home. So if you haven't heard of them, check them out. And so they worked on this one in pairs, so groups of 2, and it was over about 6 weeks. Okay, so let's dive into this a little bit more. So this is Avocado Co-op. They recently got some fuel injection funding as a social enterprise startup from a social innovation group in Guelph. So they were really at a turning point of how can we really expand and develop a clear marketing strategy for expansion into the future. So these are some of the products that they offer that you order online, and then there's different care packages that you can subscribe to, which I won't get into now. So they have different pricing structures. That was part of what the students were looking at. And I was hoping to have Albert, who's the founder of Avocado Co-op. He was supposed to be here today, but their AGM is tonight, so he's a little bit busy trying to get all that together, and he just couldn't swing both of them. But as a backup, I have Sean here, Sean Geobey, who, because I wanted an industry partner to talk about their side of being involved in this project. I'm like, wait a second. Sean was an industry partner way back when, before he was a professor. He was one of our first industry partners with our capstone project when he worked with Sustainable Waterloo Region. So he can talk about that side if anybody has questions later on. So this is how we integrate Avocado into the classroom. The first 4 weeks are basically spent on developing theory. Let's talk about consumerism. Let's talk about the history of consumerism, basic principles of marketing, and so forth. So we're getting some key content and some of that bigger picture stuff. So that's weeks 1 to 4. Week 5, we start to introduce the case studies. So the first thing is just an exploratory exercise where I get the students to just go online and see what they can find that's publicly available information about the organization. And so it's not just an open slate. They have a worksheet that's associated with that, so there's specific questions that they need to answer. They fill that in, and then they submit it on Learn. So it's an electronic worksheet. So I do that, and then the second half of that week, we have Albert come in, and he gives a talk on what Avocado is. He brings in the products. He tells them about his business strategy and so forth, and the students have an opportunity to ask questions. So a little bit of a difference from Sean's course in that here the students don't have a lot of interaction with the clients, but they are welcome to ask questions throughout. And I have the advantage of being fairly involved in Avocado as a member of their board of directors, so I can answer questions as well. So we really only meet with the client once, but the students are free to ask questions, and I'll get to that a little bit later on. And then from then on, the students have, so basically from that point on in the course, one part of the course, say the Monday, for example, that's 1.5 hours, we'll talk about concept for that week. For example, segmentation and targeting for your audience. And then on Thursday, or Wednesday or whatever, we apply that using Avocado as the example, and we have a specific worksheet. So again, we have this worksheet that I'll show you in a minute that has questions that they need to fill out. And they basically get a 0, a 0.5, or a 1 mark for what they hand in. So we're not going into detail about the marks, but it's, did you do it? But you didn't really do it that well. You just kind of, it was a half effort, you get 0.5. If you did it, decent job, you get the 1. If you didn't hand anything at all, you get 0. So the focus on the worksheets is really the qualitative aspect and not the marks, because it's really only they're worth 5%, but they build and help them in their final assignment, which is to write a report of recommendations. And then in week 12, they put together a report of recommendations and a pitch, which is not an oral pitch, but a written pitch that we can give to Avocado. And so this is an example of a worksheet. So at the top, I just have a little blurb, what readings they might want to refer to, or what frameworks. And then this isn't the whole worksheet, it's just one question. So the question is on the left, what is the story Avocado is trying to tell, and what tools does it use to achieve this? So that's a question. This is an example of how the student answered it. So I break it into 2 sections. One's what we know, what are the facts, and then the second part is trying to get the insight and the analysis from the students, which is always the part that you have to kind of pull out of them. And then at the end of the worksheet, there's usually about 5 questions, and we have the final step, which is to synthesize the information in 3 to 5 bullet points. So theoretically, they should be able to take those 3 to 5 bullet points and then bring them into their final report. So they've already done some of the background work. So it's basically encouraging them to do what they need to do anyway for the final report in an incremental process. And this is an example of one of the final reports. And again, we told them they could use any medium. Most of them chose for this particular one to do a written report. This one was more of a slide deck. So this is, what I'm about to show you is not actually how they did this. Let's see if this is gonna work. Does this work? Yeah. I just put a slideshow of their slides together. So it just should take about 30 seconds to go through. So obviously they showed them one at a time, but I like their avocado do's and avocado don'ts. They're a bit creative that way, and it was really well laid out. And they were able to bring in some of the, you could clearly see that they were bringing in the theory and the frameworks in different ways, and then they had their pitch at the end. So it's kind of cute. So that was one example of how they put everything together. So all these individual worksheets culminated in this at the end. And in terms of outcomes, for this particular project, it only ended a few months ago, and this is the first time, so I don't have a lot of great success stories yet. I have students that are now customers of avocados, so that's good. And some have decided to volunteer. But more broadly, with other courses that we've done, something similar with lots of similar stories to what Sean talked about. I think our biggest hit, I guess, was when was actually the year that Sean was involved with Sustainable Waterloo Region, and we had some students working on a project related to what if we had a climate action plan in Waterloo Region? What would that look like? And it was actually based on a conversation that we had at the launch of SEED in 2008 or 2009. And a bunch of stakeholders, Reap Green Solutions, somebody from the region of Waterloo, gotten together and were like, yeah, we should try to do this. So we got the students to work on it. They did a great job. It eventually turned into Climate Action Waterloo Region, which I don't know if anybody's heard about, but it's an active organization within Waterloo Region related to climate change. So that's sort of our success story in terms, or one example of a success story in terms of a student project actually leading to action in the long term. So come on. All right, there we go. Considerations when I'm working with industry partners is selecting one that's relevant to the course content and to the students. And developing clear expectations with the community partner. So how often are we going to be calling on them to communicate with the students? What type of communication? How do they want to be, do they want emails? Do they want a phone call? So the medium and so forth. What is their role? And determining how much of the problem or the focus is up to the student to decide and up to the industry partner. So for example, in Sean's case, a lot of his project is about defining the problem, whereas ours, the industry partner has already defined the problem and it's sort of moving further along to what can the students propose as solutions. And finally, deciding to what extent the industry partners presented with their recommendations and ideas, and how is that going to be communicated. In Sean's case, they have presentations and pitches back to the client. In our case, we don't have a formal oral presentation. It's like a culmination of the written pitches that we put together, similar to the portfolio that Sean also puts together. So these are two examples of different ways that we can bring in industry partners into the classroom. And I find and I'm sure Sean definitely finds the same thing, that it is really impactful on both the community partners and the students. So now we're open to any questions you might have. And also, if anybody else has examples of ways in which they are working with industry partners that they want to put their hand up and share, that would be a great opportunity.
Absolutely. I'll just preface this. We are recording this, so I'm going to pop around with the microphone. If you have a question, make sure that you're speaking into the microphone. We should be good to go.
Hi, so question to both. When you're looking at, or when you're looking for industry partners, Are there certain things that you're looking for in the business itself or the organization itself? Do you have certain criteria that you're looking for?
I think openness to, I guess an openness to be open with the students and to be transparent and to be willing to give them information. Because we've worked with clients in the past that are interested in the idea, but then they're not forthcoming with information, so it's really difficult for the students to get their heads around what they should, what the real issue or challenge is, or how they can solve it.
And I would also say to have a good sense of industry partners who are able to have a realistic sense of what is actually achievable in the time that we have. And it's going to vary a lot by courses. So 402 are a capstone course. There's a lot of involvement between the students and the industry partners. Jen's course is, this marketing one is a bit of a different kind of relationship. My course is a very light touch in terms of how the industry partners are involved, because the pitches ultimately aren't even necessarily going to be solving an industry partner specific problem. And so in that context, it's, it's going in and saying, in this case, you're probably not going to get much out of it. It's primarily you're going to be contributing to a conversation and meeting people. That's all right. Whereas with the 402, the capstones, it's you have a well-defined problem and you're going to get something coming out of it that'll be much more applied. Realizing that if you're also for that commitment, you have to put in more time and energy too. So I think there's an element of scaling it appropriately to what the course is as well.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. My question is actually not about the industry partners, but specifically around the tool to use. Each of you mentioned e-portfolios or class portfolios. I'm just curious which softwares have you played with, or which tools would you recommend starting with?
I take a bunch of Microsoft Word documents and PowerPoint slides and PDF them, throw it together.
Up until, I've tried different things up until now. It's, when I say e-portfolio, I haven't used a specific software. However, Catherine, are we allowed to, can we mention that now? Yes? No? Yeah, you can. Okay, we'll let Catherine talk about the.
So I'm very pleased to announce that we actually have an institutionally supported e-portfolio system. We're just in the stages of rolling it out. It's PebblePad. If you're interested, there's a session tomorrow morning from 9 to 11 over in DC, 1302. And you're welcome to come and see, hear from the founder of PebblePad. He's going to talk about various global situations where e-portfolios have been used. So I'm hoping that that will be available a little more widely in March and then definitely in the fall. So thanks for your question.
I think it was planted. Yeah, and I'm very excited to be moving over to use something more formal.
Hi, I just have a question in terms of your time and effort that you put in finding the match between yourself and the industry partner. And the second part is, have you ever experienced that the same industry partner comes back to your next offering, or is it always a new industry partner?
Sure. So the time involved is, I will say it's gotten easier the more times I've done this, because now I have sort of template models of emails to send out. But also, in part because I have some returning industry partners, I have some established networks. There's already some partners who know what to expect out of it, are quite engaged in coming in, and we'll also have recommendations for other people to get involved. One of the aspects of the course that I run is that because we do a different problem every year, with every passing year, we go farther and farther away from anything that I have done e-working. So I don't have a background in local food systems, and I was relying a lot on actually my industry networks to recruit other industry partners for me. That said, the time management involved in it, it's like it's often the case if you bring in a guest speaker or anything else that that there is managing the logistics of someone coming onto campus from off campus. Yes, you don't have to prepare, a presentation for that day, but also very increased handholding. The more people you bring in, the more that's the recruitment itself hasn't actually been a particularly challenging feature, just as long as the kind of the ask and what you expect the value to come out of it are there. A lot of people really are excited about the prospect of coming to a university campus and just being part of the energy.
And I guess it depends how many contacts and networks you have that are existing. I don't actually spend a lot of time looking for the client. Like there's usually, I'm like, this would be a really great fit. As to whether we can use it over and over again, I think it depends to a certain extent on where that organization is at in terms of whether it would be valuable for them. So for Avocado, it was perfect this year because they were just at that turning point where they needed a marketing strategy. They might be in a different place next year, so I might need to look for somebody else. But often we do have repeat customers, especially in the capstone projects. And actually with Avocado, we also introduced them into our capstone project this year. And we have, I think, 3 teams working on them with a sort of similar project. So I was really excited to see that there was that much interest in a local organization, because sometimes the students want to work with the big, like the McDonald's and the HP and the big names. And it's a lot easier, I guess, when you're developing the context, you can pick somebody that's in the region. That's why we try to go more local, so that you can talk to them face to face and so forth.
I'm going to put my instructor hat on, actually, my prof hat. I think this is really inspirational. Thank you both for giving us these examples, and I think it's really amazing the outcomes from your course and this project is very impressive. Just a small logistical question. So this was like one of the 4 parts that they did, and I couldn't quite understand whether it was going over the full 12 weeks or it was like it was a smaller, if you could just say how long, because I kind of have both things written down in my notes so I get this right.
So basically I didn't introduce it until about week 5 or 6. So prior to that it was all about foundational knowledge, and then from halfway through the course to the end of the course is where we did the Avocado assignments. So it's basically the second half. I wanted the students to have some base knowledge before they started to go into the different components, and then they can apply it in the worksheets. So I think that worked well. I think if I'd done it right at the beginning, you could do it through all 12 weeks, and in fact I do something similar in another course. So I just put out some examples of different ways that I've integrated the industry issues into the classroom, and I do an online master's course. And this is actually where I got the idea to do the worksheets with the undergrad students, is that these master's students are working professionals, so most of them working in an organization. They choose their own organization to follow, and we do it right from the get-go, from week 1. They have an introductory worksheet, and then each week they have to fill in a worksheet. It's a love-hate relationship they have with these worksheets because they do have to hand them in each week, but at the end of the term, they're glad that they've done the incremental work. So in that case, I don't decide, I have no interaction in the sense of what industry partners they choose. They select their own. Sometimes it's the partner that they're actually working with, so that's handy. So that is another way that I've done it all the way through. I do another one where I've pre-interviewed a client, and we have a series of like 6 video clips, and so the students watch that, and then there's a case study related to that. So it's not as interactive, except for they have 1 week where this experts guest lecture comes in for a week on, because this is an online course. They come in for a week on Learn, and the students ask them questions related to the case study, and so they will spend that week sort of intensively answering questions for the students. And so that's how we integrate that. Yeah.